All right, and we are on air. Hello once again, YouTube. We are back. Duff, go ahead and say hello.
Hey everyone.
All right, everyone. Hope you had a good 4th of July or whatever you were celebrating there, you Canadians. It was a great one to be had. I hope you had a good Canada. I don't actually. What do Canadians do for Canada Day, there, Duff?
Uh, Pretty much the same as everyone for the national holidays. We get a day off. There's fireworks. There's usually parades. There's usually some stuff to do at your local community centers. Friends get together. I unfortunately spent my Canada Day basically on my back. I've been fighting a bit of a bad cold, but it was a nice day. We got good weather here where I am, and if I had had a slightly different health outcome, I definitely would have gotten out and tried to see the fireworks. They're usually quite good. How about the 4th of July down your neck of the woods there, AAA?
Yes, it was a good 4th of July. I didn't actually have to go to worry about seeing or viewing anything a whole lot because they were kind of everywhere we were. But unfortunately, this year it was really, really, really humid and really hot. And I was like, well, we can go and it's. Uh, Let me preface by saying I do enjoy seeing the fireworks. I do enjoy going and being in the crowd, all that kind of fun stuff. However, with it being so muggy, with it being so humid, with it being extreme mosquitoes and children and other difficult and comfortable things, which I got a little picky over. I'm like, it's not the end of the world if I don't see them tonight. And because I knew that I had heard some on the third, and I knew I'd be able to see something on the fifth if I wanted to. So I actually ended up going to watch a movie in an air conditioned room that evening. Went to see The Incredibles 2, which if you haven't seen it yet, it's a good movie. And that was pretty fun with my friends to do and see that. And then actually on the drive back from the theater, we saw a nearby park was having its fireworks show, and a few of the fireworks got really, really hot, tall. And I go, hey, there's fireworks there. So it definitely enjoyed the fourth overall. And what I actually did on the fourth was visit my parents. They're both veterans. We talked about nothing actually extremely patriotic. They both got new phones and don't know how to use phones, which is funny. So I had to go and teach them how to use their new iPhone and stuff, and help them out. So quality time with the veteran parents kind of thing, and that kind of fun stuff. But was a good evening overall, and I am glad that at least around here the humidity has more or less gone down quite a bit. I don't know if it's painstakingly warm or humid where you are, there, Duff. I don't know how the weather is in your neck of the woods.
Oh, right now it's kind of muggy and it's kind of gray outside too, which is not so hot. But yeah, oh, humidity. Glad I don't actually live in a part of the world which has a huge amount of problem with that. It's funny. It's like I have friends who live in Ontario, and they will say it's like in the summer you get up, you go do something, you come home, you have a shower, you go do stuff, you come home, you have a shower, um, and it's just like it's just so oppressive. Just because wherever you go, your clothes are clinging to you. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to breathe, and just all that loveliness that goes along with having more of a what is that? That's a climactic weather. Uh,
Sure.
no, it's not that, but I am too sick to actually remember.
That is wow. That's impressive. What does it rain there very often, or it's usually just humid?
Um, in Ontario, you can get, depending on the region, different rain levels. But in the summers, especially in Toronto and in Ottawa, it's just really, really humid. And is it because, oh, there we go. It's because they have a continental weather system. So meaning they don't actually have access to any major oceans. And so what'll happen is moisture will collect over the top of the Great Lakes and just be held there by high pressure systems.
Okay, then I might not want to go over that direction just now. So thank you for that tidbit. That's interesting. Um, anyway, I hope everyone had a good week, and we're gonna have a bit of a shorter deal today with only a few things we need to talk about. But firstly, I wanted to go and continue on a little bit from what we talked about last week, which one of the last topics we had last week was discussing the jump in or I guess the surprising nomination of Alexandria Okosa. I just got her name wrong, but we all knew talking about the new Congresswoman in NYC for the DNC. She was the new proclaimed Democratic Socialist, and she had won her in her Congress, and now it seems as though all of the base for the DNC has gone well, gone that way, basically. So the first one I wanted to talk about today was it's interesting to see how much the DNC has changed, or maybe not as surprising because it's been kind of going that direction for so long. But I guess my first question to you, Duff, do you foresee, I guess, is it surprising, A, that this is happening? And do you think that it's, going to, or with this new change, do you think that we're going to see, a definite out with the old and with the new kind of policies going on with all the new people, or do you think that, the higher ups will be able to maybe keep their ground, if that makes sense?
Um, I would say it's kind of too early to tell. I think what we're seeing right now is the news are trying to jump on the back of the fact that someone who was long part of the established the Democratic scene, lost out mostly because he just didn't campaign. And as a commenter on our last video pointed out, this particular candidate, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is big on single-payer healthcare, and ending wars, and legalizing marijuana. And for a lot of people who are kind of in the millennial generation and a little lower and maybe a little higher, that legalization of marijuana thing is a big issue. And then trying to get out of international wars can be a big issue too. That's one of those issues which doesn't really go away. And then it's like, in terms of just doing stuff with healthcare or creating a more universalized healthcare system, that can be quite popular too. Like, of course, here in Canada, we have a more universalized system, but we didn't try and do what Obama did, which is try and outsource the cost for the insurance to a private company, but rather the government just eats the cost as things go along. So sort of saying that the government will do that, getting people better healthcare, those are all, winning issues in terms of the ballot box. So if you have a incumbent who isn't really willing to campaign, and you have an up-and-comer who's willing to promise all that in a bag of potato chips, I would say, a lot of people would get behind it.
That's very true. Well, and so, I mean, and it wouldn't be surprising, I guess, at this rate to say that, she was definitely, I guess, one of the first, but she could definitely not be the last. So maybe we can predict that there is a good chance of more like her to take the reins and to give more proclamation to, hey, here's the base, here we are, here's what we're saying, here's where we're gonna stay, and this is the new the future of the party. So I mean, I guess we could both say that there's a good shot of more participants after her. Is that fair?
Yeah, quite possibly so. The big thing which I find sort of interesting with where politics are going in the States right now is, even though you guys have a two-party system, the structure of each party is getting more diverse. So it's as if you have political parties within your two political parties. And so it's like with Alexandria here, she's espousing a lot of things which would be very similar to what members of the the federal level New Democratic Party in Canada would be espousing. And of course, they're a left-leaning party here in Canada. So to see these things cropping up in the States, on one hand, feels to me like it's like, well, it's about time. Like, if the parties were actually to disintegrate and actually diversify, I think you'd actually have a far better understanding of just where everybody sits politically, and just how the voting base is actually lining up. This idea of your two-party system, it actually hides a lot of diversity of opinion, I think, amongst the electorate as well as amongst the political classes.
Yeah, that's fair, and I think that that's kind of in a way, I guess, of a good thing where, as you said, we have the two parties and we have splintering parties as well, which is better to have more, and then everyone can kind of fill their own requirements, if you will, and you can kind of say, well, I believe in this, and that, and here's the party that kind of is more my flavor and what have you. So it's kind of better that way, and at the same time, we can kind of all still have core values and that kind of stuff. So I mean, overall, it's not too terrifying. I do think it'll be interesting to see that. It'll be interesting to see how she reacts when she is going to debate anyone from the right, because right now, and maybe she hasn't, I haven't seen it yet, but all the interviews I've seen with her are basically just saying, hey, here you are, you come up very fast, here's your platform, how did you come up with this, what are your intentions, blah, blah, blah. And so no one's really kind of attacked or said criticized what she's done yet, as far as I've seen. So it should be interesting to see how she holds up there, and if she goes to victim mentality, or how she will defend herself overall, and just see what goes on there. But I mean, unless have you seen her having to be defensive by chance at all there, Duff?
No, no, and she hasn't really played too heavily into the news cycle here up in Canada. I know Ben Shapiro in I think it was his Thursday podcast, talked a bunch about how a lot of people within the Democratic sphere are trying to say that this is the best thing, or the best newest thing, and there's all sorts of new ideas coming through Alexandria. But in terms of like policy, socialist doctrine hasn't really changed significantly in the last 80 years. And so there isn't anything particularly new that you have to address. Rather, you go back to the old arguments against socialism, which is essentially too much of it is a bad thing because you're writing off basically everyone's expenses, and that can really tank your economy. But on the flip side, taking a more socialized approach to economy can be kind of helpful as well. It can actually help to lessen the extremes in terms of the swings in prosperity and also in poverty, which are going on. Like I know I talked last week about how here in Canada we have crown corporations, and their job is essentially to try and offer a really good middle level product in whatever industry they're trying to do, to force companies to try and act better or provide better services. So it's a way of the government making sure that no one can grab monopoly in any particular place. And that comes from a very socialist perspective on things. But it's socialism that's tempered by an appreciation for free market capitalism, just trying to put restrictions on the excesses of how it might seek to dominate a particular sphere of influence or many spheres of influences in such a way that it actually provides less services to people.
That's fair. I mean, I think that there are places definitely for the ideology and ways to help people out and that kind of thing. Obviously, it's better. I mean, maybe a better way of saying it is there are overarching philosophies and what have you that work better as a group, and then we should use those as the whole. And then when we need to get into more specifics about certain situations, then we can change to, okay, hey, capitalism works in this area, communism works in this area, and blah blah blah, and as opposed to, okay, well, this is the ideology, here's what we're going to use no matter what, and kind of take that. Because I've heard several arguments from other friends of mine who say, well, if it was implemented this way with these people and this idea, then it might work out. And I'm like, well, that's a fair statement to make, and I'm not saying that it's founded in something that probably made sense at one point, but it's just hard to say. Again,
well,
like
even if it isn't, because socialism and communism and some people who espoused early free market capitalism do sort of assume that there's going to be a utopian end to all this, where everything is perfect and everybody can do what they want when they want, and that's always the problem. In fact, historically, we can look at examples of Germany during the unification. German healthcare, as it were, and the German union system actually has a lot to do with Bismarck essentially looking at what the Social Democrats were doing and saying, hey, if we give the people these small things, they will be more on our side and things will work better. And Bismarck, of course, was not a socialist. In fact, he was very much an elitist in every sense of the word. But he could recognize that there's things which we can borrow and things which we can do well, and people will be happier because of it. And ironically, that tends to be the best of politics. Usually, when the opposite party, as opposed to the party that makes the suggestion, is the party to bring it in, it tends to work out a little bit better because you have a moderating effect on one another. And because even though they're bringing it in, they still remain somewhat skeptical of the thing they're bringing in. And that allows them to tweak it more and actually treat it more as something which is a, let's say, living experiment, rather than something which is brought in because it's going to save the world and become an unquestionable facet of whatever your society is. As soon as something's brought in and it can be unquestioned, that's always the bigger problem. so long as there's room for negotiation and playing with it on many levels, I think, you know, you can actually bring in a lot of stuff into your society, which might surprise people and still get away with it.
Well, that's fair, and again, that's kind of one of the reasons why, you know, it's we can debate all day long, you know, which is better. But that's again kind of as we see now, and as we keep discussing, the issue with what's going on recently is the fact that we don't have the ability to go, hey, you know, I like parts of this, parts of that, blah blah blah. Here's what I think. Let's go and try to go make this thing that you talked about. I'm not saying it's bad, but let's make sure it's as good as it can be given context and situation, and let's just make it better. Because all we hear is the, well, you know, this is my platform, and here's what I believe in. If you don't believe in this, then you're just terrible and awful and horrible and stuff. So I mean, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm definitely, we should all be willing to have the conversation and say, well, here's good and here's bad, as opposed to what's been going on. So I mean, yeah, that's fair enough um to add to. But anyway, no, I just thought it was interesting to see the movement there, and so I guess, you know, obviously we can round it out and say that we're neither of us are surprised with the direction that ANC is going, given Mr. Sanders' his advertisements and doctrine of the democratic socialist ideas and all those kind of things. It's not surprising at all to see how far the DNC has moved, and say that, you know, maybe we'll have a minority of Democrats that think the classic Democratic way, or maybe go away. That's probably a good. Is that maybe a fair statement to make?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be an increasingly popular idea. And it's been a popular idea in the past, and it will be a popular idea in the future at some point, mostly because in terms of politics, very little that's new ever really shows up. But in a time where, let's say, the old guard of the Democratic Party appears increasingly paralyzed in terms of what it can do and not really offering any solutions to everyday people, then, you know, people with socialist tendencies and making socialized political claims will always have an ear that wants to listen, because, you know, who doesn't want to have things that are provided to them which they don't have currently?
No, that's fair enough. Well, and we'll you know, and I wouldn't mind having that debate and argument to discuss this stuff, but and I hopefully the DNC will come up with a better slogan than abolish ICE and all these crazy, you know, they want to have, because that's the I feel like the I mean, I guess given the fact that I'm definitely not on the left, of course, it's on the one, I guess, nice to say, oh yeah, well, we need to work hard to go and get a slogan against the DNC, and I'm thinking, well, we don't have to try too hard, because all we have to do is say, oh, that's their statement. Okay, I'm not for that, so of course we can kind of. And again, that's not the best mentality, but it's getting progressively easier to say, oh yeah, they want to go and say everyone gets pizza and a dog for whatever. Okay, and if you don't believe in this thing, well, then you're awful. And I go, yeah, I think we should just not be crazy. So it's interesting to see the hysteria over there. But which also kind of leads to my next point to you. I was going to talk about, and I heard this comment on the Ben Shapiro show as well. But I was going to ask you, Duff, if you think that, and it's been proven more now, would you say it's potentially fair to say that with all the, you know, grandstanding and whatever has been going on, can be compared that the more we're confusing emotions now, and when people start to talk about, you know, how awful things are and how, you know, this person is just terrible and deplorable and all these other things, it sounds like we're taking anger and frustration and we're replacing that with, okay, well, if someone's angry, that really means that they're passionate and caring, when they say, oh, well, you know, that's not fair, that blah blah blah. So do you think that it's people are starting to confuse and twist the, well, you know, the more emotional anger they get, the more caring? Is that a good, I guess,
I'm not sure if it's confusion. I think that's more just playing off of a natural human tendency, particularly when you are the beneficiaries of a lot of news media that has tried to paint lines between, this is the good people, these are the bad people. If you believe these people, then you're terrible. If you don't, then you're part of the righteous, kind of thing. And when you have media outlets intentionally trying to polarize people, then appeals to emotion and appeals to strong emotionality, of course, are going to be more and more well received. Not surprisingly, the worst thing for the news, or the worst thing for, let's say, corporations or politicians who wish to bring about a particular viewpoint, is when people are actually willing to talk with one another and be like, hang on, what did they actually mean when they said this? And hang on, let's actually wait a week until we decide how we would vote on this issue, because we don't actually have all the information at the moment. And so this increasing appeal to emotionality and to strong language on both sides is just them trying to take advantage of what has been created. The sad bit is, it's like, what has been created is probably not the best for America in general, or for, let's say, politics in the Western world in general, because we do need to be able to look at the hard facts and actually make hard choices and hard decisions. And if we're unwilling to, then the next generation is going to be like, oh my God, where did all this terrible stuff come from? You guys had it pretty good. And it's like, well, we just decided we didn't want to deal with anything that had factual connotations because it didn't feel good, and we didn't have the time because we were too busy playing on our internet and tweeting. So I think it's a sad state of affairs, but it's definitely an understandable state of affairs. But what are your thoughts there, AAA?
I mean, I think that there are too many people nowadays who kind of have the mentality of, we're not being taught correctly into how to grow up and realize that things aren't going quite the way we want them to be all the time, and how to deal with those things. Because back in the day, it was there was I don't see, I guess, arguably more opportunity, but I guess the difference is, like, for my parents' generation, they were very much, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it, here's why we're going to do it, and you can't really complain too much about that, because if you do, well, then no one's really going to care, and you're yelling at the wall, so you might as well kind of dust off yourself and start moving forward and that kind of thing. And nowadays, we have the easy mentality of, hey, if I yell loud enough, people are going to go and care about what I do. And so I think it's becoming more of a trend where, oh, hey, let me go and if I suck it up and say nothing and prove myself, the correct way, well, no one notices me. But if I yell and scream and cheer and shout and just cry a lot, then, well, people will notice me, and then that gets me into the next door and stuff. So I think it's just some of it is definitely the wrong way to maybe get to the correct spot, and that's we're being taught incorrectly, if that's the thing. Now we have all these people going, well, you're not or there was I think another senator, congressman a few months ago said, I cry whatever in pain for these children or whatever, and they kind of say, well, if you don't cry, then you don't care, and all these things. So it's not as big of a deal as it looks like it could be, but I don't know, I kind of see a trend of the if we don't say abolish this, if we don't say get rid of that, or if you don't care about this enough, then you don't care enough. So I think the higher emotions are slowly becoming more, if you cry more often, you're more credible, which is stupid. And maybe I don't know, maybe I'm just seeing more of it over here, but it sounds like that's kind of the new standard for, okay, I can believe you now. So I mean, I don't know. Unfortunately, this is a case where maybe it'll get worse before it gets better, and then we'll just not care about anything at all. But I think no, I mean, I think your point's valid too, but I hope it gets better overall. And I take it there's not as much of the emotional, hopefully, pleas going on over there across the border.
Not in the same way. Mostly because once again, we're not a two-party system where everything is completely, let's say, tied into the idea of winning an election. So there's definitely parties here in Canada which will let's say, have a very small likelihood of winning something. So sure, you can have someone taking a really emotional appeal in the House of Commons, but it doesn't quite have the same stakes. And I actually want to backtrack to something which you said earlier, which was what sort of in your parents' generation, you didn't have as much say in how things were going to get done. Let's say, because there weren't as many avenues for which you could express yourself and make your voice be heard. Whereas now we have many, many different avenues of expressing, letting our opinions be known. But the thing is, maybe not as much is maybe we're not as easy to peg down, even though we're expressing certain sentiments, right? In a world before internet, you didn't really suffer from trolling all that much, let's say. And you didn't really suffer from the anonymity bias where people would be willing to say things online, which they wouldn't be willing to say in real life. So as politicians, one of the strategies you can try and adopt to try and, let's say, make some sense of this massive online online tool where people can express opinions that they don't actually hold and can make claims which they actually have no particular ties to, is to try and say, okay, we're going to reduce everything to good versus bad, us versus them. So if you don't cry with us, therefore you're a terrible person. And then it's like, okay, we can kind of nail people with that. So it's like, if you're an internet troll, clearly you're a bad person. Well, I don't want to be a bad person, even though I troll. So I'm on your side, right? And by reducing things down to A or B, and if you're A, you're good, and if you're B, you're terrible, it might be a better heuristic for trying to deal with just how diverse the voting base is, as well as how diverse the opinions held by voters are, that may or may not be indicative of where they actually stand. So there's an awful lot that politicians have to try and work through. It's just that this is the simplest way for them to get maximum effect, especially considering emotional appeals tend to bring out emotional people, and emotional people tend to get camera time. So it's actually a fairly effective strategy if you think about it.
No, I think it is, and then that's one of the reasons why some of the fans of Mr. Piers are a very, hey, facts don't care about your feelings kind of thing. So I definitely get that, and it's good and bad, of course, to go and want to say, hey, here's my opinion, hear me roar, and then the downside of that is someone disagrees with you, then, well, now do we do? And with that being said, I think that kind of leads me to my other semi-point, which is going to make the reactions have all been, I think, either crazy hysterical or attempting to be moderate. Because I was talking to a few of my friends last week about, I guess technically this week, about the news and that kind of stuff. We had a discussion over I think talking. I don't know how it got to the ideologies, but we're talking about homes, and that led to everyone being taken care of, and that led to, of course, a discussion of communism, socialism, and capitalism. We were debating about the pros and cons kind of thing. And when I was making the discussion, I kept going and saying, oh, by the way, you think communism is this, we'll give you an example of that. And, we tried to, I guess I kept going back to the practicality of communism. My friends kept going back to the ideology. We kept disagreeing over what would happen. And eventually, I was giving, kind of parroting, Ben and other people that I listened to online, saying, hey, well, here's this example of why it doesn't work kind of stuff. And my friends there go, well, in this case, here's what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, those are basically what if CNN or MSNBC were here, that's what they would say. And I'm like, well, hey, I'm not, the bearer of every single fact in the world, but I don't think your statements have been, fleshed out. And it was interesting to see how where both of us got our information from, and how much we cared, basically. Because my friend, he had a general idea of communism, but he didn't really. He goes, I watch the news every now and then. I kind of care this way. So I guess that all being said, are you saying, at least maybe with your peers, are you seeing a kind of, I guess, the two sides of either you watch the news a little bit and have generic facts, or you are very involved with certain news outlets and have a large amount of facts to move on to? So I guess, is it you either care or you don't care about politics nowadays, or just that's kind of where we're moving towards as for our generation, if that makes sense?
I think it's one of those ones where even the things which we call facts, let's say deriving from the news, may not be completely as factual as we think, just because we don't have access to the information which people are deriving their stances from. So we still, whether we're on any side of the political spectrum, look to personalities who we wish to believe are more correct, or at least trustworthy enough that you can espouse what they're saying. And that's not really changed. I think in the broader scope of things, it comes down to when is it okay to talk about politics and when is it okay to have diverging opinions. And it's always a painful thing to sort of bring up in a conversation because you're just like, okay, let's think about politics for a sec. And people are like, oh yeah, I'm open to any sort of discussion. And then you raise one particular issue which they don't like, and they're like, well, I'm not open for discussion anymore. So it's kind of the thin veneer of civility when in reality people don't really like talking about that sort of thing, because it causes us to question deeply held beliefs, and it's not really something which is fun to engage in. And the other thing is you don't actually know how let's say well prepared the other person is to talk about these things, because I bet you there's a whole bunch of people who can pull a lot of facts on all sides who are more so sick and tired of other people saying like, oh, well, did you know this? Did you know that? And they're stuck at a very surface level when these people are actually ready to engage in a very detail-orientated level. And so they can be very frustrated with the people on the opposite side because they're just not really doing anything of substance. And I think it goes to say both ways. But in terms of the civility thing, I do find anytime you're espousing something which is more, let's say, right-leaning, people tend to have less patience for you than if you're espousing something that is left-leaning. And people tend to have more patience for people who are espousing things that are premises that have no implicit cost, or premises without discussion of cost, than premises that are talking about, hey, but if we do that, we give up this. And do you really want to give that up? So anytime you sort of try and engage somebody in a situation that requires a certain amount of depth, I find that's when people are more annoyed and also wanting to pull away. And the other thing is, it's like, I always am of the opinion that I'm not always right. And oftentimes I'm asking questions just to figure out where people stand. And the thing which I get more amazed by is people who get angry about people asking you to clarify your position, because most people's understandings or thoughts about particular topics don't run that deep.
That's fair. Well, and would you say that the discussions you have are do you feel like you're walking on eggshells, or you're pretty much, hey, you explicitly say, hey, I don't know, would you tell me blah, blah, blah?
No, I usually feel it's more walking on eggshells, but at the same time, I still try and question my way into understanding where they're coming from. And it is amazing to hear people say things like, oh, we need to be more skeptical of the news. We need to make sure that what we're talking about is actually facts. And then all of a sudden you switch gears and you're talking about a side in the issue that they don't like or agree with. And suddenly those good positions which they were trying to eke out for themselves, they just abandon, because it's like, oh, well, Trump's evil. If you push back against this, well, you're terrible. If you even question this group of people, you must be evil. And it's like, but hang on, how come there's now groups that we don't hold to the same standard as we hold everybody else? And if you were espousing this in terms of the news on your side, but you're not willing to do it or even engage with people coming from the other side, are you really espousing the positions which you're claiming to hold? And that gets you in all sorts of trouble, because as soon as you start questioning whether or not someone actually believes what they believe, usually they get their back up pretty quickly.
That's fair to say. Well, and I think that's, I definitely, I don't know, the nice thing about my friends, at least when I talked to them on Thursday, was the fact that I could say, hey, we're not agreeing here and here and here, but I appreciate, you give me a different point of view. And my friend just said, hey, I'm not here to change your mind. I'm just here to kind of gauge and see what goes on. I go, yeah, I don't want to change your mind necessarily. If I do, great. If I don't, that's okay. I'm here to go and learn more. And I think that, it's definitely, I definitely want to know not only what your perspective is, but I want to know why you're getting the way you are. And the end of the conversation, we basically just talked about, he's like, I can't go in depth with you. This is kind of what makes sense to me overall. And, I need to do more research on finding out what, why the background and the facts behind what I'm saying. But right now, that just kind of makes sense to me. And I go, well, yeah, that's fair. And, I would, encourage you to go and research some more before we, delve more into things. So luckily, I have a few friends who are pretty good at, again, the main goal is we are not there to change each other's minds necessarily, and we're again we're going to be friends at the end of the day no matter what happens, which is great because I've got another friend there who is very he's very, very smart, and he is, I think I guess to put it, I'm not sure how to say this exactly. We had an argument on Thursday over the gay cake controversy, and we discussed, well, these laws are moral and these laws aren't, kind of thing. And then I kind of just kept saying, well, if you were a capitalist or whatever, law absolutist, you believe this way. And it was I guess the moral of the story was he kept coming back and saying, well, morally this is wrong and this is right. And I go, well, morally that's not a law, this is a law. He goes, well, morals are more important. And I'm like, I'm not just debating the moral. I'm saying here's what's law and here's what's not law. And now we're going to have to debate the morality of things. And if you and I debate the morality of things, and that kind of goes back into the people with different morals, maybe we shouldn't all necessarily be living in the same community, because if I value everyone the same, then I'm okay here, as opposed to someone who says, well, XYZ is more important than someone else. And again, that which led back to the immigration debate. But it was it was nice to see, the rabbit hole we went down and figured out, well, we're actually about an inch away morally. We just kind of define good and law and should and should not be slightly differently. And I guess that's the bigger concern. But I take it you're pretty good about, trying to make sure that, okay, hey, I'm not angry with you, and then hopefully they are pacifistic when you say, hey, we're good to go, if that makes sense.
Sure. But the thing which I always try and remember is it's not important for me to convert everyone to my perspective. What's more important is just that we expose people to different perspectives and get them to think about it. One of the problems which I always find when I'm talking about people who are espousing that socialism is a universal good always seem to assume that once a socialistic government is in power or a communistic government is in power, they'll be in power forever and ever from that point on. And then I go, but the thing is, what you just explained is not a democracy anymore. And you're saying that more people are going to be represented, but you've essentially said that there will only ever be one type of government and one ruling party. Isn't that contradictory? And they go, oh, whoa, I guess, yeah, that's actually kind of odd. Like, I hadn't thought about it like that. So it's totally okay for people to have different opinions. In fact, I would prefer to be in a room with many people with different opinions than many people who have one opinion, because then you can actually stand to learn something. What I would rather argue is that if anyone is of the opinion that there is one solution to a particular problem in all cases and all times, that's a perspective which they should probably change, because that makes them not very dexterous in approaching a particular problem. But it also doesn't account for that, although there are historically many problems which are similar across time and across peoples, the solutions of one generation might not hold true to another. And what you need to do is try and get the best of, and the best of all sides, when those sides' particular perspectives are actually applicable. So I feel we lose a lot, because a lot of people are of the opinion that their side is correct and that the way they want the world to be is the best way for the world to be. When I always try and adopt the opinion that it's like, I actually want this world to be a diverse world in terms of ideas and actions and how you pursue things. I just want to make sure that there's an agreed upon set of rules that we can all agree to as we pursue very different outcomes for very different reasons. And if we can keep those rules in place and not hedge in on them, then at least we know where everybody stands vis-a-vis one another, even though their ideas and their actions might be radically different.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, would you say you meet many people who are kind of that opinion, hey, here's the answer, or are your colleagues and people you interact with mostly, okay, and then they do kind of try to think openly, if that makes sense?
I find I deal with a lot of people who are very open about ideas that they feel they're open about, but that may not actually be reflective of their actual stance when you prod them. So as I said, it's funny how people can be, oh yeah, everything's good, or everything should be this way, or I'm totally willing to hear other people's opinions except for these people. And it's like, well, as soon as you put the except in there, you have a problem, because you're not actually living, or let's say following the views which you're claiming to espouse. And that's what always frustrates me. So if someone says, I am a very open-minded person, and I'll listen to anybody, well, if the very next thing they do is shut somebody down, well, they're not really listening to everybody at that point. So you want people to actually live what they espouse, within reason, because sometimes you just need to tell everybody to shut up, so because the club's closing, as opposed to giving them more time to talk because the club's closing, kind of thing, right? But within reason, you want people to actually be open-minded when they claim to be open-minded.
Yeah, that's fair. And then, and I guess you're, would you also say that you're pretty good at de-escalation of, oh, okay, well, that's your opinion, and blah blah. And is that kind of how that pans out usually when there is a disagreement?
Oh no, I'm the terrible one who I want to keep on pushing to see where they're going to go with it. Now, I don't do that in a nasty way. I'll be like, oh, so you're saying this. Well, that's interesting. Well, what do you think about this? And how do you do this? No, this historical example here would seem to show something contrary to what you're saying. So what would you say about that? So try and pull the whole, Socratic seminar thing, get them to the point where they can say, oh, well, that's a bit beyond where I know. And do so in a way which is polite and hopefully funny and engaging. But getting them to a place where it's like, maybe I should go and figure out more about that, without leaving them feeling like I've run rugshod over them, or beat them into a corner and made them feel as if whatever they were trying to share isn't of value.
So, but that's all. That process has always been civil. There's never been a whole, hey man, you suck and blah blah blah, and you're asking me too many questions. Like, it's never been negative outcome. It's always been, oh hey, I should go and research more. I take it.
Well, I would love to say always. I'd say most of the time. Absolutely. Like, because as I say, I personally, when I engage in conversations, I'm not out to make somebody feel dumb, and I'm not out to make myself feel better. What I'm out to do is discover new and interesting things about this fabulous world which we live in, and trying to tease apart how other people might see it, because they might see it radically differently than I do, and perhaps there's something which I can learn from that.
That's true. I think there's always I think some of the best conversations that are had are when both parties can say, hey, you know what, there's got to be something that you know better than I do, and I want to know what that thing is. And that's the best way to come into and understand and actually listen to both points of view in any conversation, which I think I wish more people would do, and I wish that would be a bigger value that we all had, instead of going crazy and such. But no, I think that's a great statement to make, and a great way to end. I think we can all agree that it's better to be open and honest, and agreeing and then disagreeing are always the thing to do, and always go civility, I guess is the best way to say that. But anyway, guys, I think that should do it for this week. We will see you next week with a few more things, and hopefully you all have a great rest of the weekend. Duff, any last words?
No, I hope everyone has a good week, and happy summer.
Yes, that too. Happy summer, guys. If you're in a humid state, go to the pool or something, and we will see you next time. So thank you very much. We'll see you next week.